The ranging moved like a thin black stitch across a white garment, crossing frozen streams and low, wind-flattened ridges where the snow lay drifted like sleeping oxen. Jon learned the measure of silence there, the way men made no wasteful speech because breath made clouds and clouds drew eyes. Qhorin half-hand rode a little before the line and a little apart, as if the wind had carved him out of someone else's march and set him in his own. Ghost moved near Jon's knee, a pale pulse of motion against the blue-white world, and when the wolf stopped, Jon stopped without thinking and the men behind him stopped without cursing. Even careful men grow superstitious when the sky presses low and the trees creak as if whispering to themselves of old matters. They found the ring of stones half-buried where a hill's shoulder lifted. In the lee of the stones sat a bundle of hides too still to be anything living. Jon could smell the rot before the wind shifted. Qhorin dismounted, bound his horse's rein to a wind-gnarled shrub, and went forward as if stepping into a dream he had already dreamt. "He's been dead a week," Qhorin said after he knelt and touched the hide with his gauntlet. Ice cracked. A black face peered up. Not black by race, but black as anything left too long without sun. Black like soot had been rubbed into the pores. The mouth was open, the teeth pebbled with frost. "The rope broke," Qhorin added, touching the snapped length. He'd bound himself to the stones to make the cold slower. "Wildling?" one of the men asked, keeping his voice low because this place deserved it. Qhorin lifted the dead man's hand from the hides. A bit of blackened string was tied around the wrist with a crude charm. A tooth, a bit of antler, a twist of hair. "A man," Qhorin said. He set the hand down gently and rose. "We burn him. If he walks, it will be on the wind, not on our heels." They gathered would not fit for fire and made it burn anyway, feeding the flame with bits of oiled rag and one precious lick of lamp oil. And when the flame fought up and caught the body's stinking hide, the men stood watching with their faces set. Jon felt the heat like a blunt hand. Ghost sneezed, then lay with his nose on his paws, eyes half closed as if in prayer. Jon watched the way the smoke went, a line drawn north, like a man pointing with a black finger. At dusk they made camp among tight, bent shrubs. They ate hard oatcakes softened in broth and bits of salted meat. The men of the watch muttered with their usual rough tenderness and turned their blankets carefully so the wind would find the edges last. Qhorin sat apart, rubbing fat into his boots with slow care. Jon went to him with his own boots and a silence that had learned when to bend. "Your wolf knew," Qhorin said, not looking up. "He smells what I don't," Jon said, "and sometimes he smells it before it's there." Qhorin grunted. Good to have something born to this. He set down the boot and looked at Jon, his eyes the gray of old snow in shadow. "You've the nose for men. That will have to do for the rest." "What are we to find?" Jon asked because he liked to name ghosts when he could, even if the name did nothing but keep a man from being chased in a circle by his thoughts. "What's pushing Mance's people south harder than hunger?" Qhorin said. "What's pulling them as well?" He glanced past Jon at the men curled in a chain of bodies. "There's a woman among them with hair like late firelight. If you see her, you'd do well to keep your head as well as your hands." "I've seen her," Jon said before he had decided whether to say it. It slipped out like a breath on a cold day, visible once it was there, impossible to take back. Qhorin neither smiled nor frowned. "Then you know already that blood is not the only fire that burns in men." They found the woman with hair like firelight 2 days later when the sun had the weak heart of a dying candle. White tree loomed like a memory of a village, skeletons of huts caught inside drifts. A weirwood grown so monstrous its branches seemed to hold up the sky. It was there the wildlings lay waiting in shallows of snow, and the fight began at the speed of a thought nobody finished. Jon's breath went out with the first rush. His blade came up. He moved like he had moved in Winterfell's yard when Ironborn had crossed his own stones. Step, turn, measure, cut. She came at him with a bow close enough for the point to be a knife. Her eyes were green as leaves in a dream he had forgotten. Her breath smoked. His did too. He thought of her laugh, which he had heard once across a rise, not close, and he thought of his father saying, Choose before chance makes the choosing for you. Yield, crow, she said, which was not an insult in her mouth so much as a habit of speech shaped by the clan that had named men of the wall as they would name birds, honest and without ceremony. I can't, he said. Can't means won't, she returned, almost gently. She let the bow fall, stepped into him with a knife, and he caught her wrist, felt the bones under skin, felt the life, and felt, too, all the miles of icebound country beyond her stacked up like a wall he would be a long time climbing. Corin ended it. He struck the butt of his blade against her forearm from the side, and she made a sound like a short song cut off. The knife fell. Corin's sword did not rise for the killing stroke. Go, he said to her. Run, and say that crows still know when to give a mercy and when to spend one. She stared at him as if memorizing the line of his jaw to tell it later and make it true, then turned and ran like a red spark running along a fuse. Corin watched her go. You see, he said. I do, Jon said, though he was not entirely sure what it was he confessed to seeing. His own reflection in eyes that were not a mirror, a path and its cost, a choice. That night the aurora drew a pale green veil and then another across the sky, so soft a man might think to reach up and gather it in his hands. The men lay uneasy under it, because even beauty can wear a face that worries at a man's courage. Corin sat with his back to a stone and spoke of small things. The time a pack of wolves had run at the side of his horse for a mile as if escorting him. The way trout freeze in slow pools under ice shaped like a bishop's window. The taste of snow when a storm is about to break, metallic on the tongue like a laugh you stifle. Jon listened, not because the words were balm exactly, but because they were bones of the world and men need those to remember what shape they should stand. On the fourth day, they found signs they had not wished to find. A circle of black ash where a great fire had been built, and around it, bones, laid out in patterns that offended the eye, as if a child had arranged them without knowing the names of the parts. Among the ash, Corin hissed and drew out a knife melted into a puckered curl. Fire burned too hot for iron, he said. That's queer. Too queer. Others don't make fire. But something here wanted heat like memory. Clear this. We go. We don't sleep here. We walk until our feet have done more than they wish. They walked. When they came to the place where the mountains leaned together to make a notch like pinched fabric, Corin stopped and said, Here is where we part. Jon saw the shape of it and wished he had not. You need a man among them. I need a man they'll believe, Corin said. They won't believe me. I'm made of the wrong music. He placed a hand briefly on Jon's shoulder, weight, warmth, and then let it fall. You can tell the truth with a lie, Snow. If you can't bear that, you're not the man for this. I can bear it, Jon said, and he felt in the marrow of his bones that if a man is to bear a thing, he should say so plain and then pick it up with both hands and not look away from its shape. What came after tasted of iron and old fear, and the taste stayed on his tongue for a long time. He let the wildlings take him as perfunctorily as men who have larger worries than one crow, and as suspiciously as men who have lived with crows for years. Mance Rayder had a laugh that didn't always show on his face, and he had the look of a man who had counted coins for too long to miscount the weight of a word. Ygritte watched Jon with unabashed interest, which was better than knives in the dark and worse than averted eyes in some ways. He learned the shape of hunger in their camp. He learned the shape of a people moving, a glacier of flesh and need. He learned the patterns of the men with blue eyes in the tales and the pattern of the places where those tales got quiet. He sent word as he could, tiny messages like seeds carried on the wind, and Corin sent back the only answer a dead man can send. Jon felt the day of the half-hands end before he knew it. A thinning of the air, a hush in the snow like an intake of breath, a bird calling when it should not. He found Corin with blood on his cheek frozen in a loop and his eyes bright as any living thing. The old ranger came close as a father standing by a door and blocking the light, and said words through his teeth so low Jon had to lean in to catch them. Make it true, Corin said. He pushed, once. Jon took it. The fight that followed was not a sword dance and not a brawl. It was a man making a shape with his body that would satisfy another man's witness. Jon's arm burned. Corin's mouth bled. The last stroke fell like a hammer into lead. Corin folded like a tent in sudden wind, quietly. Jon did not look for a long while at the place in the snow that had accepted a good man. When he did, he ground his teeth until something in his jaw clicked. He returned to the wall carrying the words the wildlings would not say aloud. He returned thinner and older and a little more like the men he had left there. Jeor Mormont saw it. "You'll sleep, then speak," he said in a tone that made both into orders. Jon slept as men sleep who have kept the weather out with their shoulders for too long, and when he woke and spoke, the bear listened without interruption. When Jon had finished, Jeor folded his hands and said to the air, "We'll have need of every man then," which was the sort of thing an old commander says when he knows it is both a command and a prayer. Ravens flew. The one bound for Winterfell hit wind, made angry by the shape of the land, and still arrived with enough strength to hop and caw when Luwin took it gently. Ned read the words in the hall with the same careful attention he gave to the balance of a ledger when mending a year's accounts. He sent men to the marsh, to the coast, to the mountain clans, and he sent men to White Harbor not merely for ships but for a man to stand upon them. Wyman Manderley came himself, sausaged in furs, rings winking under the hall's warm light, his courtesy thick as cream and as fat with promise. He brought his son Wylis, who had eyes that missed little, and he brought barrels of pickled fish and honeyed walnuts and a singer whose voice would have melted a colder hall than Winterfell. He embraced Ned with the right sort of exaggeration for a vassal who wished his loyalty unmistakable, and then sat and ate and told a story about a storm that had eaten 3 ships and shat out only a cask of pears. "I can send ships to East Watch," he said at last, sobering. "3 now. More when the ice nets are cut loose from my docks. The sea is playing at being a furious wife this winter, my lord. She sulks when slighted and howls when appeased. But she will carry bread if I put the bread at her hip and push. You will have oars and men," Ned said. "You will have coin returned when coin can stand on its own feet. Until then, you will have my word, and if that is not enough, you will have this." He placed a hand on the table, palm flat, as a warrior might lay a sword down for inspection. Manderley smiled and nodded, satisfied with the weight of that. He had not come only to talk of ships. Men like Wyman are rivers with many channels, and the deepest do not glitter. He spoke, with elaborate asides about pies and partridges, of a visit to White Harbor by a lean, weary man with a face like a blade that has been sharpened too often. The man had come under a plain flag and asked to see Wyman quietly. He had spoken the name of a king as if it tasted odd in his mouth, and had asked what the North would do if a true king came to its wall and asked for oaths. "Davos Seaworth," Ned said, when Wyman had finished describing a hand with the nails grown back too thick and a courtesy that was not learned but born. He felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hall's hearth. "Stannis's man." "Aye," Wyman agreed, eyes narrowing slightly as if he could see the shapes of other men's thoughts and approve the engineering. He came with no tricks, and when he spoke of kingship it sounded like a thing he'd seen a fever take hold of a man. He said his lord believes the wall is where a king should be. "I find that a peculiar but promising madness." Catelyn's face had gone very still. Ned knew that stillness. It was the quiet of a woman who holds a strain in both hands and intends to tie a knot that will not slip. "If Stannis moves north, the South will think him defeated," she said. "Let them think it. If he moves north and dies, the South will call it just. Let them choke on it. If he moves north and lives, then he might learn that the truest crowns are heavy with old iron and not gold," Ned finished. He saw Robb nod, jaw set, eager to make an oath and ride. He saw Sansa's eyes flicker as if counting courtesies that would need to be laid upon the table when kings came to the wall. He saw Arya's grin flash and vanishingly wonder how a crown would sit on a head in the snow if a man were running. He saw Bran stare past them all, as if he watched the door open for a man whose steps had not yet touched the flagstones. Ravens flew to Dragonstone with words wrapped around each other. "We will not kneel to your quarrel with your brother's ghost or with your brother's memory. We will kneel to the law and to the old truth if you bring it to the wall. You will not burn our gods. You will not take our sons to melt into your city. You will fight the dead if they come while your cloak is on our stones." Davos brought back an answer as spare and bitter as a winter apple. "Aye, and then more words that did not soften the eye but made it stronger. Stannis would come. Roose Bolton came too, but only to Winterfell. He came with a retinue so quiet that the first the guards on the outer wall saw was the steam from his horse's shoulders. His face was as bloodless as ever, a parchment drawn over a skull, eyes the pale of a winter sun seen through thin cloud. He bowed with exactitude and did not smile. He brought no bastard with him, and no word of a bastard either. He stood in the hall and let the warmth coat him and did not look less cold. "I hear you had my bastard in your yard," he said after the cups had been filled and emptied once. He did not pretend shame, nor defend with outrage. He laid the words out like fish on a board to be cleaned. "I hear he misbehaved. He trespassed," Ned said. "He cut men and he was cut. He fled. I send the wounded home with no more hurt done to them than they arrived with." Roose listened as most men do not, with stillness that accumulates the words and their edges. "You are lord here," he said. "If he comes again and you choose to hang him, I will not come with a knife in the night to cut him down. He is my son and he is what he is. You should leash what is yours then," Ned said. He felt Catelyn tense beside him and felt her hand on his knee under the table, not to restrain, only to remind him that the room was full of men whose oaths were strings and might be plucked if a player lacked care. "If I leash him for you, I will tighten it until he can no longer choose to chew it through." Roose's eyes flickered. It might have been humor. It might have been the shadow of a lamp smoke. "It seems we are agreed about both the dog and the chain," he said. "For now." It was not peace. It was not war. It was two men setting a blade between them on a table and agreeing to leave it there for the night with the point toward neither's heart. Bolton left with his cloak's soft rustle and his men's softer. When Davos Seaworth came to Winterfell, it was with ice in his beard and a weariness that came not only from riding. He smelled of sea and old smoke. He warmed hands at the hearth and ate whatever was set in front of him with gratitude that made the food taste better to those who watched him. He bowed to Catelyn as if she were a queen, which eased nothing but made everything around it easier. He had a way of looking at men that took the polish off their speech and set it aside without disrespect. "My lord," he said to Ned, "my king is coming to the wall because the world above it is wrong, and because the world below it is a child that does not know which way to run. He can put a crown on his head anywhere. He can only learn whether it will sit true on his brow where the wind will not flatter him." "You speak well," Ned said. "It's a pitiful trick fate plays, to put words like that in a smuggler's mouth and leave lords to barter for them. I learned to count before ever I learned to count things as mine," Davos said simply. "I learned to owe, and then I learned the worth of men who pay their debts. I think the knight up there is bringing a bill." Jon did not hear those words in Winterfell. He heard the wind and ghost's breath and the low voices of men who chose their speech like wood from a scarce pile. He went out with the first small parties to find where Mance had placed eyes and ears. He returned with a cut on his cheek and a piece of black stone wrapped in cloth in his pouch. Dragonglass, obsidian, the old black glass. He made a knife from it as best he could, binding it to a bit of shaped wood, and when he cut a strip of leather it sliced clean. He set it aside with a care that made his hands feel reverent, and that made him feel old for feeling reverent toward a knife. Samwell Tarly held the glass as if it might shout if gripped too hard. He had come to the wall a coward by his own accounting, and had grown into something else it did not dishonor a man to be. "It feels wrong," he said, and then corrected himself, because Sam corrected himself as if the habit were a coat he could not take off. "No, not wrong. It feels like a thing that remembers something you don't." "We'll ask it to remember for us," Jon said. He set the blade beside Ghost and watched the wolf sniff it and sneeze, then nudge it with delicacy, as if acknowledging a fellow beast made of flint and need. The first white they cut with the obsidian did not move again. It had come out of a heap of snow like a man rising from a bath too cold to bear. It had eyes the color of the sky right before dawn when the blue is feeling its way back into the world. Jon's men shifted, because fear does not fade if you tell it polite stories. Jon stepped forward and held himself still while the thing came as if to a hand held out. Sam's arm shook when he offered the black blade. Jon took it and put it into the white where the sternum meets the throat. It made a sound like green wood catching in a fire and then went to ash around the knife. The men breathed out at the same time as if they had practiced it. That night, Jon wrote to Winterfell with his hand steadier than it had been. He wrote, "We have found a way through." He did not write enough about fear for Catelyn to worry too much, nor did he write enough bravery for Arya to imagine him a hero. He wrote a bit about the cold for Sansa, because Sansa needed the feel of Axe sometimes more than she needed a saga. He wrote a line about Ghost for Bran, because Bran would see what was under the line. He dated the letter with a day that meant little anywhere else and folded it and sealed it. In the morning, he watched it disappear with a raven like a thought you send out with no promise of return. Stannis came with banners that did not flap so much as insist they were banners, with men who kept their lines like accounts that would be checked, with a chill that was not only the lands. He came up the King's Road and veered east like a man measuring not only miles but meaning, and he reached the wall with a timing that made older men nod and then claim they had predicted it. He brought Melisandre with him, a woman with hair that had drunk a great deal of light and eyes like coals banked at night to keep a small room from freezing. She looked at Jon as if measuring the cut of a cloak, and Jon looked back and did not practice courtesy beyond necessity. "You burn gods," he said, because he had never been quick with speeches that dance, and because he had the North in him. "Wood burns," Melisandre said. "We burn wood, and men call it gods if it comforts them." Her mouth made something that might have been a smile if smiles could write letters in men's blood. "You do not like me." "I do not have to," Jon said. "I have to like the men you say will die if we do not make a fire." Stannis himself sparely noted the exchange and moved past it. He listened to Gior. He listened to Jon. He listened to a rangy man of the mountain clans who could not stop saying fuck between every third word because he had been taught to speak by men who did not waste words and reinforced those they used with the only hammer in their vocabulary. He laid out a plan that was as blunt as a cudgel and as sharp as a wedge both. He said, "We will push here," and he said, "They will break here," and he said, "Bring the ships here because the sea is a road other men do not guard." He asked Ned to come meet him on the wall, and Ned came, wearing a cloak that had known snow from 100 days, not the velvet of a man who wished to impress. They met with the wall as witness and the wind as their clerk. They did not clasp hands as boys do. They stood and spoke. Stannis asked for oaths as a tax collector asks for coin because it is his business to do so. Ned gave what he could without giving what was not his. "We will fight with you against the dead. We will not kneel to the South's petty quarrels. We will send men when men can be spared. We will guard the neck like a hand on a throat." "You will not call yourself king," Stannis said, as if ticking boxes on a board. "No," Ned said. "I will call myself Stark. That's more name than most men can carry without stumbling." "I will call you Lord," Stannis said, "until the law requires me to call you something else." "You will call me to account if I forget myself," Ned returned. "Until the law requires me to forget you." They almost smiled. It was not friendship. The North does not use that word for bargains struck on ice. But it was trust, and in war, trust is bred. The battle that followed could be called many names. None of them were sung. Men fought on snow so bright at noon it made them sick, and at night on snow so gray it reflected no light at all. They fought yelling, and they fought gagging in the breath of their own fear. The wildlings broke when cavalry came where they did not expect cavalry to be. On ground men had said horses could not cross. They broke not because they were cowards, but because their duty lay not behind shields but behind children and the old and the particular stubbornness of living people. They fled because sometimes the only way to carry a child out of harm is to leave a line of brave men dead and call it sorrow and keep moving. Mance Rayder fought like a man who had worn two cloaks long enough to be cut by both. Jon met him once at the edge of the noise and looked him in the eye and saw the shape of a king of a country that had never been taught to read oaths written on paper. He saw a man fit to be broken and was glad he did not need to break him himself. Ygritte did not die that day. She lived, and that was its own Pelennor in some small way. She lived to look at Jon across a trodden field and say nothing and turn her head and show him the line of her neck as if to say, "Here is the place where words go when they grow too heavy." He saw the butchery of that day in flashes for years after. A hand still gripping the hilt of a knife with no arm attached. A horse sitting as if at rest with its forelegs folded, its eyes gone long and dull. A boy turning because his name was shouted and dying because he turned. He did his work. He did not do more than his work because he had learned at Winterfell that men who do more than their work when cutting often cut more than they meant. When it ended, Stannis did not strut. He stood with his jaw set as if he could unclench it only with a pry bar and looked at the wall as if measuring it for a suit of iron he intended to make himself. He gave orders that were neither cruel nor kind but necessary. He told Davos to bring him bread and letters. He told Melisandre to keep her fires, but not on any tree that had a face. He told Jeor what he would do and what Jeor would do, and Jeor grunted and did his part. Ned watched the men go to their tasks and thought of the South's rooms full of boys arguing over a table that had never felt the weight of a dead man's blood. He sat with Stannis in a small room at Castle Black, a room the size of a rich man's hall's vestibule, and they spoke again, now with less wind and more heat in their words. They spoke of the Riverlands, of the Lannisters, of a boy with a golden head and a mouth already twisted by men's obsequies. They spoke of Renly and of a shadow the color of a candle's backside. They spoke of Davos and of a letter. They did not speak of Melisandre's god beyond the shape of his flames. Your letter was the first from the south I did not wish to throw in the fire this year, Ned said. Make the second as good. I will make swords better than letters, Stannis said. If words can be pounded into steel, I will be the man who works the bellows. Words can be pounded into law, Ned said, not as a rebuke, but as a brother speaking of his own craft. We will need both. There were days after when the world seemed made of tasks that did not admit music. Men repairet, men counted, men vrote. Arya's stick men acquired company. A stick king with a stick sword too large for any sensible stick, a stick wolf with a tongue out, a stick girl with a net. Sansa taught the wives of men who had marched north to make an onion pie without onions and still call it pie without shame. Bran fell out of his chair once and laughed the fear out of 4 men by cursing them with an invention he made up on the spot to send their wives' children that were wolves. Rickon learned to sleep without waking screaming every 3rd night and only every 5th. Catelyn wrote to Riverrun and did not write to some men because words would make only trouble and not bread. Roos's men were found again, at a burned farmstead on the road to the Rills, pretending not to be Bolton's men and failing at pretense because the bits of red thread at their cuffs had been sewn there by a woman whose hand knew only one sort of stitch. They had been cutting off men's ears and calling it tax. Great John dragged 2 back to Winterfell with one hand while eating a turnip with the other and guffawing so hard he near choked. Ned hanged them after judgment by law so careful Ser Roderick would have smiled, and he sent the bits of red thread back to the Dreadfort in a packet with a needle and a note. Mend your cloth before it chills you to the bone. Ramsay came a last time, and it was not rain but a brittle clear day that saw him tread Winterfell's stones. He came with 20 men who thought themselves ghosts and were only knives, and he carried in his mouth a smile he had worn threadbare and kept wearing because some men are proud of their rags. He chose the gods wood, perhaps to make a point, perhaps because he liked the look of red on white. He found Jon there. There was no ceremony. Ramsay said, "No one," with a tilt of his head, and he made a motion with his hand that might have meant come and might have meant run and might have meant nothing. Jon held out his hand as if to a hound and said, "Heel," and Ramsay laughed, and then Ghost came out of the shadow of the heart tree as if the god had breathed him out. He hit Ramsay at the hips and bore him down into the soft places of the snow that were shallower than they looked. Jon stepped onto Ramsay's sword hand and put his weight and felt bone go, and Ramsay made a noise Jon had not known men could make without dying. He did not die. He snapped like something with teeth but no purchase. They bound him with 2 ropes and a chain, because if you bind a man like Ramsay with only one kind of thing, he will make a fetish of breaking that one kind and do it. They took him to the hall's yard for judgment, not to the gods' wood, because the gods' wood had eyes enough. Roose did not come. Jon asked if he wished to send a man to watch. Roose sent a man with eyes like stones that have seen too much river water. The man watched and said nothing. Ned sat in the high seat and listened to Ramsay speak. He had been taught the law by men with calm hollows around their mouths. He had learned the custom of the North from men who had broken bread with his father and who had colored their stories with blood and laughter in equal measure. He had the right and the duty to make the end. He did it. "Ramsay Snow," he said, "you have answered to men's law with a laugh. You have answered to custom with a knife. You will answer to both with your life." He rose. The yard hushed. Men stood taller without meaning to. "I will do it." He did it with ice because that was the sword for such moments, and because mercy without steel is only a wish. Ramsay knelt, still smiling, as if he would die in character and so cheat the grave of the truth. Ned did not give him speeches. He spoke the words every Stark has spoken and then brought the sword down clean. It was not joy. It was not sorrow. It was a kind of speech made with iron. The head thumped to the straw. The body fell forward like a sack too full to hold its own shape. Jon watched and did not look away, because some rooms in a man's memory demand a witness of the self. Ghost stood and did not move either, and when the last tremor left the body, the wolf walked away, uninterested in meat that had been taken by law. Roose received the head in a bag and sent back a strip of linen as white as his face and as impersonal. A bandage or a surrender or both. He did not ride to Winterfell. He sank, quiet as silt, into his own hall, and from there sent no more men with red thread at their cuffs to levy the old tax of cruelty. After, men in the north walked differently, as if the flagstones had been reset. It is a strange thing, but a true one, that after a clean stroke falls where it must, there is a kind of lightness in the very air, as if a house that has lost a rotten beam breathes deeper. The small folk looked at the sky with less anticipation of falling iron. The lords wrote letters with fewer barbs hidden in the courtesies. Catelyn slept 2 hours more each night. The children quarreled over bread as children should, with affronts that dissolve under laughter like sugar under heat. The war in the south stank and shrieked on. Tywin Lannister gathered and broke and gathered again. A man making a shape from men's suffering and calling it order. The phrase withheld or bestowed with the careful malice of misers who lend sugar and send a letter later to say the debt is due. Riverlords bled and scooped up their blood with cupped hands and flung it back, shouting the names of sons. Edmure held where he should have yielded and yielded where he should have held with an earnesty that would have been heroic in a ballad and was only human in a holdfast. Yet the absence of a northern king in the south pulled the teeth from the red wedding that might have been. The song that would have been written there dried unsung in some pimply minstrel's throat. Stannis held the wall not as a man holds a woman in a dance, but as a man holds a plank while water hammers. He did not love it. He respected it with a severity that passed for love in men like him. He sent men to Eastwatch and to the Shadow Tower and to the bridges where wildling feet had made grooves in old wood. He sent ravens to White Harbor and got replies written in a hand so round and pleasant Jon imagined the ink itself fattened as it dried. He sent Davos to Winterfell and to Bear Island and to Carhold with words that were stone and words that were bread. He allowed Melisandre her fires and forbade her the faces of trees, and she smiled and bent like a reed in the wind. Melisandre watched Jon when he came to Castle Black with men from Winterfell to change out the garrison. She watched him as a man might watch a doorway where someone might appear who would either save his life or set his house afire. She spoke to him once under the blue noon. "You have shadows in you," she said. "They are not my god's shadows." "I have a wolf," Jon said. "That is a shape a god likes," Melisandre returned. "You should be careful which ones you call." She did not press. She was a woman who knew how much pressure a jar's lid could take before cracking. She was also a woman who could set a jar in the hearth and feel no guilt when it burst. He did not call gods. He called to the men he knew. He watched Sam hold a knife with both hands and not let it shake. He watched Dolorous Ed say a thing so sad and so absurd that 7 men laughed and did not die for it. He watched Pip turn a jest into courage. He watched Gren plod and keep plodding, and sometimes plodding is the virtue that wins the day. When he slept, he dreamt again of the crypts. Sometimes Lynna's statue looked down at him with stone eyes that seemed less blind than sculptors intended. Once he dreamt Ned standing there, holding the fog-colored cloak, and when Jon reached out to take it, Ned shook his head and wrapped it around his own shoulders instead. "Not yet," the dream Ned said. "You have another cloak to wear before this one." He woke with the taste of iron in his mouth and the feel of ghost's fur under his palm, coarse and warm. Bran's own dreams walked narrower paths and truer. With Jojen's quiet prodding and Mira's bright cheer, he learned to follow summer into the places where smell is color and light is warmth and distance is a thing your body knows as your mind rests, contented, in a high place. He learned to climb without legs. He learned to listen to roots. He learned not to fear the crows that came with 3 eyes and sat bold as bandits on the weirwood's cheeks, pecking at the red with ceremony. He did not go too far. He came back. That was the lesson Jojen whispered most often into his ear. Go, then return. Learn, then tell. Bran told Jon what he could in crooked, boyish letters that had leaves and wolves drawn in their margins. Jon kept those letters tucked with the obsidian blade, because both were tools of a sort, and because both made him feel less alone in a place that ate men's names when they shouted them out on cold nights. Sansa received a letter with a careful seal and a flourished hand that smelled of crushed mint and expensive candles. It was from Oldstones, a woman who styled herself queen of a place that was only a ruin, who spoke of songs that men sang about her and asked delicately whether Winterfell might like to have some part in a tale newly written. Sansa read it twice, once as a girl and once as a woman, and burned it because she had learned to read the space between the lines and to see that some women ask for company only to have someone to push from a height later. She did not tell Arya. Arya would have run to Oldstones with a knife and made a poem of events no minstrel would have known how to hold. Theon Greyjoy's story curled back toward the north like smoke that would not leave a room. He made a mess of Pike as a man will make a mess in a house where he grew with too many unspoken insults for walls. He boasted, failed, strut, failed again. Asha saved him twice. She did it without thanks and with sharp words because words are sometimes a ladder and sometimes a fence. Balon demanded a crown's weight of him and offered in exchange the kind of love a man gives to a sword that fits his hand and cuts true. Appreciation without tenderness. Theon decided to be the sword and discovered he was a hand. Hands cannot cut. They can only grip until the bones ache. He came again to the shores of the stony shore with fewer men and more resolve to make his father proud. He found men from Barrowton there with stout hearts and heavy shields, and a woman with a scar who had taught Arya knife tricks, teaching boys to stand with spears level and knees bent so the force of a charge would go into the ground through the stick in their hands and not through their bellies. He watched this through a spyglass and felt a revolt in his stomach, because pride and shame taste similar at first on the tongue, and only after they go down does a man realize which he has swallowed. He made a choice then that he did not think to call brave because he did not speak to himself in that tone. He pulled back his men and sent 2 small boats at night with casks that were not ale. They were 50 weight of iron spikes and tar. He left them where the surf would bring them into the reach of men guarding the cove with nets. The men found them in the morning, cursed, dragged the spikes out, and set them on the sand to glitter like a mouthful of teeth. Then they used them to ruin the prow of a ship that had come to take them. Theon watched. He told no one what he had done. He felt a little sicker and then a little cleaner, and he told himself that it was wind. The dead moved, not in ranks like men with a paymaster at their back, not in swarms like bees with a queen to please, but in lines that did not make sense to those who have not watched frost take a field, starting in one corner and creeping until even the stones go silent. Men learned to say the word other without shifting their eyes aside, as if the naming alone would bring consequence. They learned to set fire to their fear and call it warmth. They learned to sing quieter songs when men stood watch, because the night did not like laughter that much and would answer it with things a man might mistake for a joke until he lost his cheek to a grin that was not a grin. Stannis held. Ned held. Manderley sent. White Harbor's bells rang sometimes in fog when men came home and sometimes did not ring for men who did not. The neck made its own talk, low and complicated, and then sent out that talk in the form of reeds woven into shapes hung over doors. Come, go, beware, be patient. Mira translated some for Sansa and Arya made a set of her own, hanging one over the door to Rickon's chamber that meant do not wake the wolf. It worked more often than chance would have allowed. In one brittle dawn, Jon and a half-dozen men went out with Davos to see what the sea had brought to Eastwatch in 3 manderly ships with names that tasted of oil and brine: Granite Prince, Bountiful Mercy, Deep Knife. The men of White Harbor were round and cheerful even far from their own kitchen fires, and they moved with a discipline that was half dance, half the muscle memory of men who have hauled rope since their fingers learned to curl. Davos spoke to them in their own speech, not the words but the cadence, and they did his bidding as easily as if he had grown up in their lanes. "No banners in the rigging," Davos told their captain, a woman with arms like barrel staves and a laugh like a gull's. "Not for this. Let the night think we are only men." "Men are enough," she said, "but I'll not tempt the god with thirsty eyes." They went out far enough that the wall became a line and then a dream. The sea was a flat blade with little nicks where ice brushed it. Davos pointed. Jon looked. There were shadows moving where light should have eaten them. Davos turned the ship with a hand that had thrown smugglers' loads and kept them both out of sight and on schedule. "Back," Davos said, "and fast." He did not waste breath on more. Jon stood with Ghost braced at the prow, fur lifting in the wind, eyes red and fixed on the shape in the distance that even a wolf did not know how to name. They made it back with a wind like a blessing, and the men on the wall saw their sails and did not waste time in argument. They fetched oil and fire and stuck bundles of arrows in the snow so they would not throw them away in excitement. Stannis came up the steps 2 at a time with a set to his mouth that would have made a man confess to sins he hadn't had time to commit. Gior moved like a bear in a field where bees had made an unfortunate choice to nest. Melisandre stood with her hands tucked into her sleeves like a woman tasting a stew that was only in her mind. Ned arrived after, wrapped in a cloak streaked with frost that had not yet melted from his breath. The things that came out of the water that afternoon were wrong in the way a story told backward is wrong. They were not many, which saved men from madness. They were enough to make a mark in memory. They came with ice clinging like jewelry. They came without a sound, which was the worst. Arrows lit with pitch burned and then went out. Iron rang and did little. Dragonglass sang and did much. Men used words like thrust and parry to tell later what they had done. In truth, they fell upon the old black blades like drowning men upon doors and asked to be carried. The knives carried. The men did not all reach ashore alive. Jon killed one with the obsidian knife he had bound himself, and he felt in his bones a note that would haunt him in quiet halls. He did not feel triumph. He felt a little less ignorant than he had an hour earlier, and that is a kind of victory the North values more than wise men in the South will admit. Sam killed one with his own shaking hands, and afterward he vomited and cried and laughed and then went to sit beside a brazier and look at nothing for a long time. Ed made a remark so sour it could have curdled milk, and men laughed for a long breath and then fell quiet, because laughter and terror are brothers. When it was done, when the sea lay flat again as if nothing had risen from it but a wind, men counted and gave names to the dead. Stannis did not forget to do the count himself with his own eyes. He did not send a man to do it. He nodded once at each name called. He did not bow. He did not pray, not where any man could see. He went away and came back with orders that made sense, which in the dark world is a mercy in its own right. In the night that followed, Jon dreamed of a door. It stood in a place where the snow glowed without light. The door was bone. It had no handle. He lifted his hand and knocked, and the sound was like the noise a raven's wings make when 100 lift together. The door did not open. He woke with Ghost's head heavy on his chest, the wolf's breath warm and damp through his shirt. He lay still and counted to a number men's stories used to ward off bad luck, and then he rose and went to the wall walk and stood there with the wind cutting like honest knives at his face. He thought of Ned's hand on his shoulder. He thought of Lynna's stone fingers. He thought of the fog cloak. He went down to the yard when the sky was more gray than black. He found Stannis there already. The king, or the man who would be called king when the law could catch up with what was real, stood alone, head bent, hands behind his back, as if listening to something old. Jon went and stood a pace away and waited. "You do not want a crown," Stannis said, not looking at him. "No," Jon said. "Good," Stannis said. "Neither do I." but I will take one if men will use it to listen. If I put a crown on your head, would they listen?" Jon's breath made a small vapor. He watched it vanish. Some would not. Some would pretend to and make trouble later. "Honesty," Stannis said. He looked at Jon now, and his eyes were the blue of the sky when a squall has just passed and the water has had time to think about what it has done. "The wall will need a lord." He let that sit, not saying the word he would have said to other men. "Commander." He had learned enough to know the Night's Watch was its own small kingdom. "The wall needs men," Jon said. "It will take them faster than a lord can call names." "It will have to learn to take slower," Stannis said. "And the North will have to learn to give faster." He turned his head and looked down the yard toward the well, which had a crust of ice on its bucket. "I will ask you a question, and you can take as many days as you like to answer, but I would prefer fewer." He paused. "Will you wear black?" Jon had imagined the question. He had thought of it while counting arrows, while sleeping under a wall that makes men dream of cliffs. He had thought of it kneeling in the gods' wood at Winterfell with his palm on bark. He had thought of it with Ghost's head in his lap and with Arya's stickman tucked into the strap of his pack and with Sansa's bread in his satchel. He had thought of it hearing Jojen say door and hearing Ned say not yet. He had thought of it and had not put his tongue to the word. "I gave my word to hold Winterfell," he said. "You did," Stannis said. "You kept it." He did not flatter. He placed the fact like a coin and pushed it toward Jon to spend as he chose. "Winterfell will hold again without you for a while. The wall may not." He shrugged. On another man it would have been careless. On Stannis it was something like tenderness. "If you choose Winterfell again, I will not break my spear on your back. I will call you stubborn and keep riding. If you choose this, I will call you a man who knows what is on fire and what is only smoking." Jon looked north, as men will when they speak of duty even if the duty is at their feet. He felt the pull in his chest and recognized it as the same pull he had felt the day Ned had told him a name without saying it. He thought of Luwin saying that belief is its own kind of magic and that so is the feeling in the Godswood that does not feel like belief. He thought of a boy with blue eyes whose hand had moved after it had been cut off and then had not done so when the black knife kissed him. He thought of the words he had written, "We have found a way through." "Not yet," he heard himself say, and knew, with a calm that felt like a door opening, that the old words had turned. "But soon." "Soon," Stannis said. He did not press. He had learned a set of manners at the wall. Give men a moment to find their fear and name it. "When you are ready, I will be, and if I am not, I will pretend to be until I am." Jon almost smiled. "You can make crowns," he said. "I can count. Between us, we may keep a few men alive." "We will lose many," Stannis said, not to be cruel, only to be honest. "We will lose fewer than fools would." He went away then because men like him know when to leave a man alone with a question. Jon looked north until his eyes watered. He went south in his mind to Winterfell. He saw the hall, the hearth steam. He saw Ned with a cloak like fog and a sword like ice. He saw Catelyn with her mouth set and her hands soft on Bran's hair. He saw Arya slipping a willow switch behind her back when Sansa came into the room and saw Sansa raising a brow and not saying anything and Arya putting the switch down anyway because sometimes the truest kindness is to accept the dignity your sister offers you. He saw Rickon asleep with Shaggy Dog's tail on his face. He saw Mira knotting cord for a snare and Jojen staring into the air and smiling with the smallest part of his mouth as if someone had told him a joke only he could hear. He saw Ghost curled in the Godswood in a shadow made of leaves even in winter, red face above him like a blessing that does not ask permission. He went to write a letter. He began it, "Dear Father," and left it that way. He wrote of men and knives and names and knights. He wrote of Stannis with care and of Melisandre with less. He wrote of Davos with something like love. He wrote of Sam with pride he did not blush to admit. He wrote of black glass and dead water. He wrote, "Not yet, but soon." He sealed it and sent it. He watched the raven become a dot and then vanish. The weeks that followed were a kind of waiting that was not idle. Men worked until their hands bled and then used those hands to grip banners and ropes and knives. Eastwatch became a kitchen and a forge and a counting house and a chapel. The Shadow Tower sent men who could hit a hare at 100 paces on a windy day because that skill is less about sight than stubbornness. Castle Black became a city of sorts without the vices cities prefer, because the cold punishes vice more quickly than any law. The wildlings who had bent their heads with bitter pragmatism bent them less. They began to sit with men of the Watch and with men of Stannis's retinue and speak of ordinary things that make enemies bearable. Children, pie, the taste of different waters. At Winterfell a frost came down one night so fierce that ink froze in a pot Luwin had left by a draft. Sansa woke to see her breath and went back to sleep with a smile because the cold felt honest. Arya ran in it with bare hands because pain sharpens and because she was young enough to heal in hours. Catelyn sat by the hearth with a mending basket and thought of a girl who had torn a sleeve on a hedge at Riverrun one spring and had not known then what tearing really was. Ned wrote to Moat Cailin and to Torrens Square and to men whose names were not in songs. And he wrote to White Harbor asking for flour and sending in exchange a set of combs the Mountain Clan women had carved from bone so delicately that holding one felt like holding a breath. Roose Bolton wrote nothing. That, too, is a kind of letter. Bran went down to the crypts and did not fear. He put his hand on the stone wolf at a king's feet and felt nothing. He put his hand on Lyanna's stone sleeve and felt warmth, not in the stone but in himself, and he laughed because that is not how the world works and because sometimes it is. He dreamt that night of a tree growing out of a crown. He told Jojen. Jojen nodded as if this was the kind of dream he had expected, and Mira rolled her eyes and told them both that if they didn't eat, their dreams would take to eating them. Theon turned his ship's prow north and then east and then north again, as if writing his name in the sea where it would be washed away. He went along the Bight and came up with a Manderley ship once by accident or fate. He did not know it was the Deep Knife until he was too close to pretend he had not seen. The woman captain with the gull laugh stood at her prow, hands on hips. She hailed him. He hailed back. They stood there looking like two animals at opposite ends of a field, each trying to decide if the other will bolt or charge or graze. "You left us a nice present," she called over the water. The winter wind took half the words and returned them with a frost. Theon said nothing because men drown speaking sometimes. He lifted a hand. Then he turned the wheel and slid past and told his men to make as if they had not been seen. "North remembers," the woman called, and then she laughed as if the very joke was to say a thing no man could forget. He sailed on. He did not go to Pike. He did not go to Winterfell. He took his men to a cove he knew where there were seals in summer and nothing in winter, and he beached there and let them run out curses and then fear and then other curses until they were men again and not boys with iron at their belts. He slept on a rock. He dreamed of a kraken in a wolf's fur. He woke with tears frozen at his temples because sometimes the body is a traitor and tells the truth when the mind would make a poem of it. At the wall, the aurora came again, green and gold and flicker blue, and the wind shifted in a way that made old men spit and say, "Tomorrow." Jon stood with Ghost and watched it. He remembered Bran's word, door. He thought of Stannis's word, soon. He felt his own word in him like a stone warmed in a pocket by a boy on an errand. Hold. He went down to the yard and sought Jeor Mormont. He found him alone with a cup not of wine but of broth, steam making a curl like a woman's hair in summer. Jeor regarded him like a man regards a tree that has given good shade for years and now must be felled to make a beam. "You've an answer," Jeor said. He did not ask. Bears do not ask like other men. "I'll take the black," Jon said. He had not meant to say it yet, but the words knew their own time. They jumped from his chest like salmon in a bright stream. "I'll take it now if you'll have me." Jeor grunted, which was relief, and then nodded, which was joy. "We'll have you." "Winterfell," Jon began, because his duty has two ends and he would not drop one in picking up the other. "We'll hold," Jeor said. "Stark will see to it. They'll curse me for stealing his son, but he'll write letters and send bread and clean his sword and tell stories to children. And all that will keep more men alive than one man at one wall. Go to your father. Tell him yourself." "I will," Jon said. He thought of the godswood and the heart tree and the way the steam in Winterfell's halls rises and makes a veil between men's faces for a moment and then goes. He thought of Catelyn's eyes. He thought of Arya's rough, fierce hug and Sansa's careful hands on his sleeve. He thought of Bran's palms and Rickon's shout and Robb's grip. He thought of Ned's hand on his shoulder and Ned's words. Not today, then tomorrow, then yes. He thought of Lyanna's stone face and of a fog cloak folded in a chest. He wrote first because the raven would fly faster than a man in a world of winter. He wrote, I have kept your keep as long as I could. He wrote, the wall is a keep that is all keep and no hearth. He wrote, I will be your son wearing black, if that suits you. He wrote, I know what I cannot say. He wrote, tell me only if I have your blessing. I will do this with or without it, but I would rather do it as a boy does things, with his father's name in his mouth. He sealed it and sent it and watched the sky until the dot vanished. Then he took his cloak and ghost and a horse with legs like Patience and rode south to Winterfell. He rode through a world that had made itself smaller so men would have to come close to speak. He crossed the last river with ice groaning under, and he thought, that is how oaths sound when they are heavy. He camped one night in the shell of an old holdfast, and he heard wolves sing, and Ghost whined under his breath and then slept. And Jon slept too with one hand in the wolf's fur because that had become the shape of comfort for him. He came to Winterfell at dawn on a day that felt like a hearth had been wheeled out into the yard, the sky so pale it might be kind. Ned met him not in the hall, not on the wall, but in the godswood. He stood beside the heart tree, one hand on the trunk as if speaking to a friend he had not wanted but had come to tolerate. He turned as Jon came, and the lines of his face rearranged themselves into a shape Jon would keep in him when the world turned its tables again. Pride and something like worry and something like relief, all three admitting they had to share the same room. I got your letter, Ned said. I did not mean to ask, Jon said. It seemed too much. It seemed also that I could not leave it unasked. You should ask, Ned said. A son should ask his father to bless him when he means to do a thing that will change him. He nodded to the tree. If you are to take vows, best you take them here first, where the old gods can hold you to the words. Jon knelt. The earth was cold even through his breeches. The tree's face looked down with its old sorrow, or its old mercy. Jon put his palm against the bark and felt the ridges. He said the words he had learned as a boy playing at oaths that are the bones of men. He said them as a man, and they settled in him like heavy pieces of furniture in a house newly built. He rose. Ned came forward and put his hand on Jon's head, then his cheek, then his shoulder. My son, Ned said. He said it plain. He said it like a brick set in place. Go. Wear black. Keep men alive. Send them home when you can. Send them to our hall when you cannot. We will feed them. Remember your name, the one you have used, the one you might one day have. All of them. I will, Jon said. He did not cry. The cold keeps tears where they belong. He embraced Ned, and Ned embraced him, and Ghost pressed against them both, insistent and true. Catelyn came after with Sansa and Arya and Bran in his chair and Rickon half climbing it and Shaggy Dog grinning like a devil. Catelyn did not put her hands on him, but she did not flinch when he bowed his head to her. Keep my children while you keep yourself, she said. She was not cruel. She was exact. Right when you can't. If you die, you will not be forgiven, but you will be remembered. I'll choose the first, Jon said, and she almost smiled. Sansa hugged him with a care that remembered every bruise he had come home with. I will send you something that tastes like home, she said, even if it's only bread. It will be better than only, he said. Arya hit his arm and then kissed his cheek and then dragged him down and bit him quick on the hand. So you remember I've got teeth, she said, fierce and laughing through tears she wouldn't name. And he laughed and promised to show the scar to the men of the wall so they'd know what sort of wolves Winterfell still made. Bran held his hand a long time. You'll be a tree, he said, very serious. I hope not, Jon said, smiling. You will, Bran insisted. For some men, the wall is a tree, and they stand in it. You'll be like that, and you'll be a door too. Jojen, at Bran's shoulder, nodded as if hearing an echo. Mira slipped a string of knotted reeds into Jon's hand. For luck, she said. or for remembering which way to pull when the snare tightens. They mean the same thing sometimes. Rickon did not speak. He hurled himself at Jon's legs and wrapped them, and Jon lifted him, and Shaggy Dog jumped up and made a noise that would have sent a timid man leaping back. Ghost and Shaggy touched noses with dignity. He left them again. He rode with the cold cutting his cheeks. He rode feeling lighter and heavier both. He looked back only once at the gate. Ned stood there, one hand lifted. Jon lifted his. Then he turned his face north and let the miles do their work. He took the black in a ceremony that would have seemed ridiculous to men whose notion of sacred is made of gold. He said words under the open sky and felt them set. He touched the old gods who make no promises and keep all of them. He cut his palm and watched his blood drip into snow and vanish. He felt something old pass through him, not possession, not benediction, simply acknowledgement, as if the wall had murmured, "This O-N-E," and moved its ancient weight a fraction to make room. Afterwards, Stannis nodded once and did not cheapen it with speeches. Gior smiled in a way a bear smiles, which is not with his mouth. Sam clasped him as he had clasped no one in his life and then stepped back, embarrassed by his own heart. Ed said something so self-undoing it made them all laugh and break the solemnity, which is good for men's knees. Night fell clean. The aurora came again and lay its green upon the world like a faint blessing. The wind moved. The old ice creaked the way ships do in a harbor when tide turns and remembers itself. Ghost stood on the wall's edge and lifted his head, and Jon lifted his face, and together they breathed the same cold. The world felt enormous and very small both, like a room in a great house where a child has left a toy and a man has left a secret, and both wait to be found. The door was there. It had always been there. He would walk through it again and again now, back and forth, carrying names in and bringing men out. He would hold. The wind took his words when he said them, as wind always does. It carried them out across the haunted forest and the bar rollins and the cold, patient rivers and the stone halls where wolves are carved at men's feet. It carried them down to Winterfell and under the arches and across the glass garden's green fog and set them gently in the godswood, where the heart tree listened and did not smile, because trees do not have to smile to be kind. It carried them over White Harbor, where Wyman Manderley raised a cup to a man he had only met twice and called him by a title he had not earned yet, hero. It carried them out to sea, where Theon Greyjoy leaned against a rail and thought of a boy whose name he had never said without a sneer and found, to his surprise, he could say it now without one. It carried them to Pike, where a man with a crown of wet iron looked up and wondered why his heart had missed a beat and announced to the air that he hated wolves. In the south, men made their shapes in blood and song. In the north, men made their shapes in ice and bread and counting. Both would meet soon. The night does not care for men's plans. It will take a man's candle whether he is reading a letter or sharpening a sword. But promises matter even to the wind. Jon had made his. Winterfell had made its. The wall had made its before there were men to sign it, and it would hold the signature of men like scratches on glass, enduring, unpretty, real. He stood his watch. He stood it long. He stood it in company and in silence. He stood it when the dead moved like memories and when the living moved like hope. He stood it and learned the names of all the steps from the yard to the top so that in the dark he could count them and know where he was. He stood it until the skin on his cheeks went leather and the skin inside his chest grew thin with the pressure of breath and duty both. He stood it and thought sometimes of the boy he had been walking a wall with Robb and trying to make his feet hit the same cracks, and sometimes of the man he would be if he lived to see grass again. When the knock came on the door, no, not on a door. When the knock came in the air on the world itself like a hand hitting bone, he was ready. Men gathered. Ghosts' hackles rose as if a wind had reversed. The night in front of them did not change color, changed weight. Jon lifted the obsidian knife. He lifted his voice. He said, in a tone that made a door into a wall, "Hold." They did, and the North remembered how.